Hello, viewers, wherever you may come from. Today we are discussing the symbolism behind the zodiac sign of Aries. And this video is going to be covering a lot of information, so just be prepared to take in a lot. And with that being said, let's start the video. So, symbolically, Aries represents the divine fire that ignites within the mind. A better word to use would be spark. Let's look from a universal standpoint. Our reality, how it started at least, imagine there is nothing. And then boom, you have existence, like a light bulb. Universally, Aries represents the Big Bang. And we don't have to get very far into the evolution argument. One thing we can agree on is the sun is the central event of our reality. Everything revolves around the sun. And if you compare that to the Big Bang, the sun was the first thing to spawn. This is all relevant because, this is the first thing to take place to create our reality, that spark. Aries is the first sign within the zodiac. And, this spark, this impact, this energy, in nature, it is how a lot of Aries people operate. Just find your nearest Aries friend and observe how they operate. They're very direct. It's just in your face, like not much thought, just coming towards you. And it's kind of funny that I say coming towards you because Aries represents, the ram. It charges towards you. But we're going to get into all of that later. Let's talk about the sign of Aries from a philosophical standpoint, because we all can benefit from this. Philosophically, like I said, Aries is the divine fire that ignites within the mind. The body part that rules the sign of Aries is the head. And we have two heads. You have your head up here, and then you have your head down there. This is the heaven, that's the hell. You see, that down there, that's the underworld. And to understand that, first you must understand the planet that rules Aries, which is Mars. Mars represents passion, it represents aggression, desire, drive, instinct, courage, spark. Mars is that, everything that encompasses that. And Mars rules two signs. It rules Aries, which Aries rules the head, and it rules Scorpio, which rules the genitals. Aries is the flames of inception, that spark. Now, with that being said, the genitals are your underworld. It's where the deepest desires, your lust, all of the, things like that, it dwells down there. That is where the light doesn't shine, your underworld. This is your head. And don't get it wrong, both can be used for good and evil. What I'm trying to convey to you is that Aries, which rules the head, represents the flames of inception. Aries is the kundalini. It's tapping into it. And that's not me saying that because you're an Aries, that's you. That's what I'm saying, what this represents in nature. This is the aspect that people need to understand. And if you don't understand kundalini, I would look and try to understand that force first, maybe do some research. But you may be able to still understand, every religious book, it doesn't matter what you follow, talks about this force in one way or another. The flames of inception, the very thing within us that can create another human being, but people aren't using it the right way, you see. But before I go too deep into that, that's another video. Aries. And like I stated, Aries rules passion, aggression, energy, instinct, like that. A lot of Aries children, and I'm sure my teachers, if they're watching this, they look at your students' birthdays. A lot of Aries children unfortunately get diagnosed with ADHD because a lot of them, not all, they usually have higher rates of energy. But it's just the influences from that planet. So this is where everything that I've been saying is going to come together and start to make sense if it's not already. The first day of Aries starts on March 21st and it goes through April 19th. Now, what's relevant about March 21st It is the spring equinox, the day where it is perfect 12-hour balance of sunlight and darkness. And even that is symbolic. You see, there's the light and dark, heaven and hell theme going on again. You know, the heaven and the underworld, the spring equinox. Now, with that being said, we're going to go to every continent, well, not Antarctica, but we're going to go to all 6 continents, and I'm going to bring up a deity from them that references this same Aries, passion, Mars, God, or whatever you want to call it, this source. Because all of the 12 signs, you know, they connect to the universe. That's really the only way you can put it. You know, we all are aspects of the universe, but this is the understanding of that energy. And if you didn't know, the spring equinox is the first day of spring. What does spring represent? Why do we have an Easter bunny? Fertility. You know, bunnies or rabbits, they are the most fertile animals. They get it on. Like Marvin Gaye, who was also an Aries, funny enough. Fertility. As you're about to see, a lot of these deities, they all somehow represent fertility. You know, it's a reason they have these children running around finding eggs. And I only put the emphasis on children because that's the first deity we're going to get into. Let's start in Europe. You have a deity known as Pan, who is the goat man. Funny, Aries, goat. Pan rules the spring. Pan is known to be around a lot of children. Actually, Peter Pan is based off this deity. And, you know, the children, they are around Pan. And this symbolizes fertility, you know, youthfulness, the flames of inception. Pan also has a form of art. And there are a bunch of other words that rule Aries, but art, A-R, is one, art. So now we're getting to Africa. And Africa has 2 Aries representations that I could find. I'm sure many other continents have multiple representations of this energy or this force, just because, you know, societies break off and form new civilizations. But with that being said, in Egypt you have a deity known as Men. Men is a goat god. Men is responsible for, or represents, fertility, being one, balance, and virility, which virility is strength, courage, drive, the same energy that represents the sign of Aries. You also have in Africa a god or a deity in Ifa known as Shango. And Shango is ruled by Mars, for one. That's just the first one. Where's the color red? You know, red, the color of Mars is red. The color of Aries is red. The root chakra that rules Aries is red. When you think Aries, think the color red. Shango represents the same energies as Mars. You know, you have that passion, the aggression. It's not necessarily the fertility aspect, but it's the same aspects of Aries and Mars. Because as you can see, yes, Aries does have a sweet side, you know, let's get it on. The Marvin Gaye, that sweet side. But then there's also, you know, it's the planet of war. Like arrows, arena, arrested. Well, no, not assault, but you get my point. And we're going to get into the words later. So we've just discussed the 2 in Africa. You have Men. And another thing about Men, you have virility, Pharaoh, Egypt. And I'm bringing up the word Pharaoh because it's very close to virile, the pronunciations at least. Pharaoh is, you know, those hormones, they're raging, how bunnies get it on in the spring. And then you have Pharaoh. And Men was considered by many to be the first Pharaoh, just for the record. And also just relevant to this, you know, when you're in the wilderness or you go camping, there is something called a Pharaoh rod. This rod is a iron stick, which, funny enough, Mars rules iron, the metal. And you strike this stick and it creates sparks. funny enough. And also, I meant to say Ogun. Ogun is the other deity that represents Aries and Ifa. Sorry for all of my Ifa believers. Please forgive me. And just a little more on Ogun. Ogun is literally the god of war, Mars. He rules iron, and in many of the tributes to Ogun, they use other animals, but the common animal used in the sacrifice is a goat or an ox. Do you see the correlation to the ram Aries? Mars, even backwards. If you take the S off, you have rams. If you flip it. And before all my people get judgmental on Ifa, let's go to the Bible, because this is also relevant. The scapegoat concept. Really, the whole story of Moses is talking about Aries. Moses is the avatar of the Old Testament, just like how Jesus is the avatar of the New Testament, which is that's all symbolic, because Pisces, after Pisces, there would be an Aries. The Old Testament was the age of Aries. You go backwards, you had the age of Pisces, which is where Christ was sacrificed. And now we're in the age of Aquarius. The next age will be the age of Capricorn. But there will have to be a great reset. We won't be here. But without going off topic, let's talk about the story of Moses as well as the scapegoat concept. So I'm going to start with the scapegoat method just because it's the easiest to explain. In the Old Testament, to receive forgiveness from God, you had to go through what is known as atonement. And what atonement is taking two of your goats. In the depictions, it's usually one black goat and one white goat. The black goat would be sacrificed. In many cases, sacrificed to the goat god Azazel, or the fallen angel. Yes, it literally says this. The white one would be released into the wilderness to live its happy life. And there's that Aries theme again, the light and dark, that switch. Think about a light switch, the heaven, hell. The black one was sacrificed. The white one was pure and led into the wilderness to live its life. It's symbolic. Now, the story of Moses is a little more subtle, but the theme is there. And what you have to understand, like I stated earlier, Moses is looked at as the Jesus of the Old Testament. You can look it up for yourself. He's literally the avatar of the age of Aries, just like how Christ was the age of Pisces. Now, with that being said, Moses, his ultimate goal was to liberate his people who were enslaved. He accomplishes that, and one day he goes upon a mountain and he encounters a burning bush. And this burning bush reveals himself to be the face of God. And when Moses comes down, he comes down with a radiance, as described in the book. And this radiance is a glow. It's attributing to, the youthful glow, the virility associated with Aries. And this is also relevant because the most popular depictions of Moses is a man with horns, Aries, the goat. And not only that, when Moses was leading his people to freedom, to the promised lands, God chose to show them the way by using a pillar that was on fire. You see the two fire themes, and I didn't mention this earlier, I don't think, but Aries, the element that rules Aries is fire. So you see where this is all interlocking. Now, I think I'm going to do part 2 tomorrow because this is a lot of information to digest and I still have a lot to share with you. So for now, I'm going to sign out. Like, share, subscribe. Yeah. Until next time.